Her price is far above rubies, strength and honor are her clothing. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. These words from the book of Proverbs aptly describe Deborah Norris Coleman Brock, Mrs. Horace, founder of the Women's Club of Lebanon, on January 18, 1897, when the ladies needed a social, intellectual, and moral center in Lebanon, with emphasis placed on the betterment of the community. What we are, far more than what we do, makes us a power for good and evil, and the developing of a high type of character was, and always should be, the first object of our Association of Pennsylvania Women, said Mrs. Brock on the occasion of the Women's Club's 25th anniversary, and it epitomizes her great depth of character. A woman of deep religious conviction, Deborah Norris Coleman Brock believed one should think the best, not the worst of others. She believed one should be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove in relationships with others. Federation of Women's Clubs was born August 20th, 1858, to George Dawson Coleman and Deborah Brown Coleman at their large estate, which is now Coleman's Park. Thus, she was born into what was called Lebanon's royal family. On April 15, 1878, Deborah married Horace Brock of Philadelphia in an extravagant wedding, the most brilliant wedding that ever occurred within the borders of staid old Lebanon County, uniting two families prominent in the iron and steel business of Deborah began a personal mission of satisfying the needs of the less fortunate around her. She visited the old and the ill and helped them in any way she could. Mrs. Brock soon realized that the sick people needed more than medicine. They needed professional care. She interested other citizens in her mission, bought a private house to provide this special care, and thus created the first hospital in Lebanon, the Good Samaritan Hospital. That was in 1897, and the training school for nurses was opened with 3 students enrolled, 2 women and 1 man. The hospital had been dedicated 3 years earlier. In 1904, a nurses' home was given to the hospital by Horace and Debbie Coleman Brock as a lasting memorial to the 25th anniversary of their marriage. The training school closed in 1949. A total of 166 nurses graduated from the school, 165 women and 1 man. In the Nutting Building for $15 a month. They also rented furniture and, of course, a piano. Each member contributed a china cup, a saucer, and a plate, as well as a sterling spoon that they purchased for 50 cents. The china and silver became property of the club. At every monthly meeting, there was a roll call, and each member responded with a quotation, a verse of poetry, etc. Marking dangerous intersections, issuing fines for littering and spitting in the streets, placing a policeman at 8th and Cumberland Streets, having a curfew, providing a waiting room for streetcar passengers, closing stores early because they were open so long, and in addition to disposing of litter, cleaning those streets and snow removal, as well as a comfort station at Market Square. The Women's Club met in various buildings after the Nutting Building, the Huffman House at 6th and Cumberland Streets, 2 rooms at 4th and Cumberland Streets, now the Stites Club, the Episcopal Parish House, a room at Market Square, the Republican Club, and later the Guilford House, then the Lebanon Valley National Bank. In 1907, while meeting in the parish house at St. Luke's, a decision was made to encourage school children to have flower gardens to beautify the city. Conference by trains, trolleys, and carriages. Mrs. Horace Brock, now an honorary president, was appointed national chairman of the Federation. A Kate Casnat McKnight Memorial was initiated. Each member was assessed 25 cents a year for 4 years for a total of $100 apiece, payable in $25 a year installments, probably the first scholarship fund. In 1911, Mayor Marquette delivered a clear and exhaustive address on landfills and sewage. In 1917, the Women's Club moved from the parish house to rooms in the ideal garage. Keys were purchased for 25 cents each, so each member could enter at will. In 1913, the Women's Club used its influence to have sex hygiene taught in the schools. In 1914, another move for a change of meeting place was made. Teachers' salaries be increased from $300 to $5 a year. In 1940, Mrs. Bamberger, Mrs. Brock, and Mrs. Kreider were selected as pioneer women with outstanding service to the community and with medals. In 1941, during the war years, women whose fathers or husbands were stationed at Indiantown Gap were invited to join the club. In 1947, the Youth Conservation Group was started, the goal being to bring culture to the lives of underprivileged girls. For many years, it was successful until it became too popular, attracting more than the underprivileged. Were you aware that the 5th and Cumberland Street location was once coveted as a site for a new hotel? No doubt, they were sent away in a hurry. In 1961, the Women's Club helped financially the Home for the Widows and Single Women, also known as Oakview. As early as 1898, records record that classes in German were offered 3 mornings a week and once or twice a week in French. Parliamentary lessons, 5 for $1, and lectures on history were also available. The empty bookshelves in the former Funck home, purchased by the club in 1923, inspired Miss Kreider, president, to call for books to be used first for members, then for children, and finally for parents of the children. These books formed the nucleus for the community library, which was organized by the club with the help of other civic groups. 2 decades earlier, in 1901, there was a traveling school library, and they were taken to rural schools, sometimes by fire company drivers. This project continued until 1914, when teachers no longer accepted them. We mentioned the school gardens, and the Women's Club had 144 plots available to pupils. The club employed a professional gardener and furnished seeds and prizes. The produce raised was displayed at 8th and Cumberland Streets behind the courthouse. Visiting nurses were incorporated and are now a part of the Good Samaritan Hospital. It was an outgrowth of the Lillian G. Light Memorial Association, to which the club considerably contributed sums of money for a period of years. In 1921, under the auspices of the Women's Club, the League of Women Voters was organized. Miss Catherine Hoffman, club president, was elected the League's first president. The club can also boast of another first. In 1921, Mrs. Edgar A. Weimer, former club president, was elected the first woman school director in the city of Lebanon. Quite an achievement. The club made its contribution towards the war effort in both World War I and World War II. Activities included knitting, sewing, and preparing bandages, serving as Grey Ladies and USO hostesses on the club lawn, helping with Red Cross drives and collecting books for Army hospitals. The clubhouse was used as a depot for clothing drives, with club members sorting and packing the garments. 60 invitations were sent, but 24 attended the first meeting, called by Mrs. Brock. The meeting was held at the POS of America, Hall on Cumberland Street, near 8th. The Women's Club met at various places in the Lebanon Valley, and the only prerequisite was a piano. You may be amused to hear some of the early rules. Roll call was called at every meeting, and each member responded with a quotation. Failure to report cost $1. Payments. Each member was also assessed $1 to purchase a piano. Throughout time, during wars and depressions, the Women's Club weathered each crisis as it came. However, it always contributed to community projects. Since the incorporation of the Women's Club, all money earned was invested. So in 1922, Miss Anna Kreider convinced the Lebanon Women's Club board members and later the members to purchase the Josiah Funck home at 15 Cumberland Streets for $26,000. The following investments were used: a $1,000 invested in a U.S. steel sinking fund, $700 from the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe mortgage bonds, $500 in Pennsylvania Railroad Company stock, and two $100 Liberty bonds. With the money accumulated from their favorable investments in 1922, anticipating with dread the necessity of finding another suitable meeting place, it was about time many members felt to investigate and the desirability of acquiring a permanent house. The Josiah Funck mansion at 450 Cumberland Street was up for sale, and it was the perfect place for the club's needs. It had endless possibilities. For $1 a night, and that included breakfast. Men were also accepted as well as women. A member who paid $35 had her name placed on a brick, and there was a rivalry among the women vying with each other to see who would purchase the most bricks. Well, it got paid off in 1943, and that was because there was a very generous donation made anonymously for $14,000, and it remained anonymous for a lot of years until 1976, when Mrs. Sam Wise revealed that Dr. and Mrs. Alfred Stickler were the benefactors. Well, the first meeting took place in the new Funck home on November 18, 1923, and the meetings were held on a Saturday. In the first years of its existence, had moved 9 times, and they needed a permanent home. A Funck property, located on the southeast corner of Century, now 5th and Cumberland Street, which was for sale. She envisioned the possibility of making this property into a commodious clubhouse. Mrs. Brock, honorary president, was consulted. She not only approved the proposal, but offered to give $2,000 toward the purchase, provided no part of the property ever be sold. Now, I must add that this was not recorded on any deed, so it didn't hold. But on June 2, 1923, the property at 450 Cumberland Street was sold by Sarah Funck, Helen L. Carmody, and Alfred Funck, children of Josiah Funck, to the Women's Club of Lebanon for $26,000. Light with a tract in East Lebanon, the Light family played a prominent role in the early history of Lebanon. Abram's grandfather had come to America from Switzerland in 1719 and lived in the vicinity of what is now 4th Street between Willow and the Lebanon Valley Railroad. Upon the death of Abram Light, the tract was sold to George Cassett, or Gasser, in 1851, then to Simeon Guilford, who was assistant engineer in the building of the Union Canal. It is believed that Simeon built the original dwelling on the property. Architects placed the timing of the building as pre-Civil War Victorian, sometime between 1852 and 1856. The Guilfords sold the property to Levi Whitmire of Harrisburg. In 1868, it passed into the hands of Isaac and Catherine Beckley of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and subsequently to Josiah Funck for $3,500. Mr. Funck was a prominent financier and attorney in Lebanon. He was elected district attorney in 1854 and in 1873 represented Lebanon County in the Constitutional Convention of Pennsylvania. The club occupied the property for the first time on November 10, 1923, and the formal opening and reception was held on January 14, 1924. In 1943, at a regular meeting on November the 6th of that year, Miss Kreider, of course still president, and Mrs. Franklin Bamberger, treasurer, formally burned the mortgage. It gave them economic security. Through the years, the club auditorium was used for Good Samaritan Hospital nurses training graduation exercises, DAR meetings, Harmonia Music Club meetings, recitals, mental health seminars, as well as wedding receptions and private parties. Our women's club were registered with the State and National Preservation Trust, and it was incorporated in 1902. The club received distinguished citations as a historical treasure, and by 1979, through the efforts of the club's Memorial Education and Historical Preservation Trust Committee, the clubhouse was included in the PA Inventory of Historic Places. Then, on January 31, 1980, the PA Museum Commission notified the club that the Josiah Funck Mansion was entered onto the National Register of Historic Places, and that was quite the accomplishment. To maintain this home in a manner in which all of us took pride was a monumental task, but they pledged to do it anew to preserve the landmark in the city of Lebanon into the 21st century and beyond. Now, I must tell you that the property was listed for sale on April 25th, 2011, and then sold on May 9th, 2012 for $182,600 to H&H Realty Holdings out of Litz. We rented from the new owner, Todd Jarvis, for several years, actually 7 years. That's core to our being, and so we decided to secure a new meeting place, and on October 5th, 2019, moved to Juniper Village. Then the pandemic hit and the coronavirus, and its ideals maintained, sometimes improved upon, strictly up to the times. For example, yearbooks still are produced, and group members get their pictures taken on an annual basis. The musical tradition was also continued, as music usually is part of every program. Lebanon Valley has provided outstanding artists who are always very generous. We're going to give some examples here. The Jessica Weidman concert, the dance troupe with Judy Williams Henry's girls, just lovely. And club members were very loyal, serving wherever possible and upholding the club's traditions. They will continue to serve, keeping the integrity, principles, and faith in human nature to preserve our heritage. Thank you, and God bless.